Welcome to another podcast. My guest today is Will Johnson, who wrote this book, Cannabis in Spiritual Practice. Will is joining me on Skype from Costa Rica, although he used to live in Vancouver Island in Canada, as did I. And we're going to talk about the ideas of Buddhism and also the use of marijuana and how these practices can be integrated in ways. So, Will, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be here.
Stealing money from the poor is a bit rash. Line your pockets, fill your tanks for your rockets. Look at it, we just can't stop it. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. Just don't be a cunt, mate. That's the only rule. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. All been going on way too long.
So like I said, sort of the first question that I'd like to ask you is how you came to the conclusion you had to write a book about this idea of integrating marijuana use into Buddhism, which has that sort of tenet or precept of not using any intoxicants.
Right. Well, yeah, it's a big question. To start that off, when I teach in the Buddhist world, I insist that the students follow all the precepts.
Okay,
Not to use any kind of intoxicants, alcohol, cannabis, any other mood-altering kinds of drugs. And we'll get into this in a little bit for why I do that. And actually, the short order or answer on that is that I do that not because I'm bound to the traditions, but because it works for those particular practices.
Right.
So the practices that over the years I found that cannabis directly supports, and we'll get into talking perhaps about the differences of and why it is different, are probably practices that would be considered more relating to the Shiva tradition. The great Hindu god Shiva. Very, very body-oriented practices, and Shiva was someone we might want to get in and talk to this about the history a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely do want to ask you about that. Yeah, for sure, because that's really the two major themes in your book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. It's great. Shiva was a cannabis user, and through the spontaneous movements that would start occurring in his body, these are the legends that are passed down to this present day.
Right.
Through these spontaneous movements, he's said to have brought the body-oriented practices of yoga and dance to the planet. Now, that's pretty much what happened to me. When I'm a lot older than your guys' generation, right? So for me, it was like 1966, and I'm in university. It's an all-male university, and there's probably a dozen guys on campus experimenting with this strange new substance, strange to white, upper class kids, right?
Yeah.
And in truth, it was God's medicine for me at the time. I mean, it woke me up to so many things. Start getting me in touch with such a deeper place in myself.
Right.
And just start opening up all these avenues and doorways that had never occurred before.
Right, ways of thinking, new ways of thinking,
new ways of experiencing myself. Actually,
right.
Certainly new ways of thinking and and understanding and starting to see the difference between kind of the college persona that I was, projecting and realizing, hey, wait a minute, that isn't quite so authentic. Some of what I'm getting in touch with and what's going.
So at this point, you're talking about using marijuana when you're young and in university, but you had not at this point got into Buddhism or practices of.
No. I mean, I was interested in those kinds of things, and I don't know that we want to get into this at any kind of length. When I was a kid, I had experiences. They would happen going to bed at night between the ages of 8 or 10. It would happen a lot. And I would feel it coming on, and the next thing I know, I'm falling through layers and layers and layers. And as a kid, I just dissolved out into, it felt like the universe felt completely natural. I could never put any words on it, however.
Interesting.
Although I did write about that experience in a book called The Sailfish and the Sacred Mountain. But we don't have to go there. So I had some tendencies. I had some predilections to be open to a simple, beautiful helper like cannabis, and it was very effective.
Right.
And it opened me in a big way, and some of the openings and some of the qualities of consciousness, the shifts that were starting to happen, very, you know what it's like. It's very natural. It's a different dimension, or so it seems. Drew me to to Buddhism, to Dharma practices, to yoga.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Is it sounds like maybe even marijuana led you to some things like Buddhist practices and perspectives.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
And it just opened me to the awareness that there is a lot more going on here than meets the eye. That how we take we take so for granted that reality is constructed this way, and we're born into these bodies and we're living out these lives, and there's a whole other thing going on,
right?
That some of us by blind luck, by the tendency, by the help of a simple herb, have opened up to. Now, it doesn't work that way with everybody, but it works that way with a lot of folks, and certainly a lot of folks that obviously I get to interact with because of my background and my experiences. So where I initially went, where I started, was what's so extraordinary about the herb is that it awakens the body.
Right.
And we talk about that in the book, on every part of the body, down to the smallest cell. There are these minute little pinprick blips of sensation. And I'm going to segue into Buddhism very quickly here, but let's just stay with the body, and we get high, and all of a sudden there is that feeling quality that comes through. The body awakens.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I was a kid. I was into music, and frankly, I was kind of a nerdy kid. I was into academics, and I was not into my body. I was not.
You're in the head, yeah.
Exactly. So, in my early 20s, and it was also, through the awakening through the herb, I realized, something's not right here. And then I moved out to California and started, getting into yoga and started running and doing things like this. And then I also got Rolfed. Now, Rolfing is this form of very, very deep body work that really awakens the body. And for me, it was, revelatory, very, very strong, transformational work. And then I was drawn to study with Ida Rolf. And so I have this kind of
Ida
body.
Rolf is the woman who created the technique.
Who created, Rolfing. And what's, I'm probably jumping ahead of myself here, but what's interesting about her, she just said, most people, we live in these kind of, tight bodies that were braced against gravity and everything's held. And that's really going to limit the natural expression of who and what we are. So a lot of the deep body work was very structural to try to help people get into aligning themselves when standing more with this imaginary vertical axis. If you do that, the gravitational field's effect on you changes. You don't flow away. You don't start levitating. In addition, obviously, to gluing us to the earth, it allows you to start letting go. To literally start letting go through the body. Now, look, if you're in a body like this, this is coming through kind of hunched over, right? Yeah. What I'm doing with my fingers. And you were just to let go, what would happen? You just fall on your face.
Right. I see what you mean.
Literally playing with this dance of upright balancing. You can start letting go. Now, what Ida Rolf, she didn't really want Rolfing to become this glorified form of physiotherapy that it has become. She saw it. She'd never used the word spiritual, but she saw it virtually as a transformational practice. Because she says, what would happen here when you really let go? You don't have to brace yourself against gravity anymore.
Yeah, right. You're in line with your bone structure and things.
Exactly. And she said, what would happen that would allow you to let go? And what that letting go then would do, it would kindle what she called evolutionary energies, which is really the awakening of the strong presence.
That's really cool. And I've heard of Rolfing, but I've never heard of her and that perspective on it. That's pretty
Yeah,
neat.
well, this is where it started, and it quickly moved into, I view it as kind of a glorified form of physiotherapy now. Look, I still love working on people. I work on a lot of my Buddhist students because the practices that I brought into the Dharma world are very, very body oriented. But anyway, I would say you'd let go, and these evolutionary energies would be awakened, the awakening of the deep, deep energies of the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
We start off with getting high, and there's that buzz, and then it's sort of, what do we do with it? What was some of the practices that I'm sharing in the book? Those are ways then to start going in deeper and deeper and deeper, and then awakening some of the really large large energy. So I got into my body in it was a revelatory way for me, especially because I was one of these guys that would walk around with my head in the air and scoff at physical endeavors. Right?
Okay, yeah.
Trip. And I was then naturally drawn to things like sitting and breathing. Sitting and breathing. What could be more somatic, body oriented?
Yeah.
Than sitting and breathing. And a lot of the work with Rolfing was about that. Ida would say the breath, she'd start off to say the body is something that's wrapped around a breath. You want to start letting all those wraps flow freely so the breath can just open. And that is very, very similar to one of the culminating instructions on breathing from a very, very early Buddhist instructional text whose words are attributed to the Buddha himself. The Dharma starts off with just observing the breath.
Yeah.
And if I have a criticism of the traditional way that the Buddhist Dharma, the practices are taught, it's that in that observation, the easiest way to do that is kind of hold the body very, very still, but there are some really, really nasty side effects from doing that.
Like long term.
Yeah. What happens when I sit in front of a hall now of Buddhist meditators, the first thing that strikes me is how overly still they're holding themselves. Just like the goal of the practice to become like a stone garden statue.
Yeah, right.
And that holding very still. Now, this comes from my Dharma experience as well as obviously my Rolfing experience. If you freeze the body and hold it really still for long periods of time, and that's what the Buddhist students. So that's what we do. We go into long retreat. We're sitting maybe for 8-10 hours a day, even more.
Yeah, that's intense.
No, it is. It's very intense. And if you do that and you're just sitting in a body that's tight and held and frozen and stiff, you're going to create a lot of tension and pain in the body. You're going to stop breath in its tracks. Hold your body, freeze your body really still right now. You can't breathe, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to stop breath in its tracks. In other words, you're really going to tighten the wraps around the breath so it feels imprisoned. And that kind of holding quality, the tightening, over the decades, really, I've also realized that what it does, it actually feeds that already out of control parade of random, unbidden thought stuff that goes on and on and on and on and on. Now, you can get lost in that thought stuff when you get high, but you can also use the cannabis to pull the plug on that thought stuff and really, really get into the body. So, it's crazy to me. Tightening the body, stopping breath in its tracks, feeding the mind would be things that the Buddhist Dharma would
what I understand, like
the opposite of that, right?
The reason they're like to sit still and what I understand, and I'm not practiced in Buddhism, so You can
Yeah.
correct me for sure, but they're focusing on the breath when they're doing that, right? They are trying to focus on the breathing and breathe consciously and bring awareness back to the breath when their mind travels off, right?
Yeah, you got it. And that is the basic and most fundamental technique. Although that's, from my perspective now, that's just the beginning. And you really did. You talked about it very pithily and precisely. You sit down and you turn your attention to your breath. Now, we'll get into this maybe later too. Also, a criticism I have of the Buddhist Dharma, the teachings that are coming over from Asia, no teaching at all is given about how to sit. So people, they sit down, it's unfamiliar, you're uncomfortable, you're tensing the body, and it can frankly be nightmarish for a lot of people.
For sure, you get back pain or whatever coming up pretty quick.
Back pain, neck pain, the knees and the legs can start burning, and a lot of that is coming from sitting as though you're going to become like stone garden statue of the Buddha, that you're just you're there, you're totally tight. But anyway, the practice, yes, the first stage. There's a text if people are interested or know about these things. It's called the Satipatthana Sutta, and in the beginning, right at the beginning, it goes on and on and on. But right at the beginning, the whole of the meditation instructions on breathing are given there. And as I said, this is a text whose words are ascribed to the historical Buddha himself. So the first thing that is said when you sit down, sit with the spine erect and upright. Now, they do say that, but most people either, we're not sophisticated enough in our bodies to know what the erect and upright is and what it feels like, or to how to, work in such a way to create that. So I coming into the Dharma world with this Rolfing background, I felt in some weird way that I had a funny advantage. So, there's that. And, as an aside, in Southeast Asia, where that particular sutra is revered, the most popular or the most common posture of meditation is totally collapsed. The head just hanging forward.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And that just was crazy. Starting there, bringing the the spine erect and upright. We may get into talking about the spine later on, and then just start observing the breath. Most commonly, either as it enters or leaves the nostrils, or in some practices, even in the stiffest of bodies, there's going to be a little bit of motion at the belly wall. It's going to rise, it's going to fall. But let's just say we're working just to bring our awareness to the breath as it comes in, as it goes out, as it comes in, as it goes on, goes out. It's very powerful, very strong practice over a number of hours, over a number of days. The mind just calms right down, and you become much more, present, present to what's going on. Now, that is a practice, though, that, to be honest with you, Carl, sometimes works better in a somewhat we're okay with the internet. In a somewhat stiff body. It's a practice. You're focusing your attention. You're bringing your mind in to focus your attention very precisely on a specific object, and then you're watching the breath goes in, the breath goes out, the breath goes in, the breath goes out, and all of a sudden you've lost awareness of the breath, and you're off in a parade, random thought, and you're off, and oh wait, I'm supposed to be watching the breath. So you refocus, right? So it's focusing, losing focus, and refocusing, and from and that's the first level. That's the first level. Now we could, we're going to be jumping around here. That works better with an unmedicated mind. Concentrating the mind, focusing in. For me, invoking Shiva, it's about letting go. It's about letting go. The energies start awakening, they start moving, and I'm not directing it. I'm not focusing on anything. I'm not attempting to make anything happen. If I go off somewhere, there's no place to come back to. It's all just about surrendering, letting go, surrendering to this current of the life force that that the herb can awaken through a lot of these practices.
Yeah. So when you're talking about invoking Shiva, you're talking about using marijuana, but when you do it, it's from what I gather from reading the book and everything, it's like you say you're not directing it, but you're practicing a physical movement of some kind, and it might be more like intuitive, but it is moving the body and putting your attention into the body. And marijuana has a sort of effect that just kind of does that. And I've found that many times without purposefully trying that. It just kind of puts my attention there, and then I feel like moving the body. And yoga type of movements do feel more natural in that state.
Well, so this is what happened to Shiva, evidently. And like talking to you, it sounds like the same thing. When it wasn't immediate for me. I was in university, and it was actually after I'd started getting Roth in California. So that was probably about 4 or 5 years later. I was using it more for playing music, getting creative, having insights. Just the whole that whole side of the creative quotient that comes with it. But it wasn't really until 5, 6 years after I started using it that I really started getting into my body. I realized, I got to get strong. I got to get strong in my body. This is ridiculous. Got running, got into yoga, different kinds of things. That's when I got into Rolfing. And it was, I think, about a number of months after I'd started getting Rolf. I'm out in a garden. I was living in a little seaside town, California, Pescadero, California. I was caretaking a ranch there. Late in the afternoon, I'm out in a garden. I got high. It's beautiful. And I started feeling this vertical upright that Ida Rolf was talking about. I started so this is, and all of a sudden, a lot of sensations start getting released. Literal waves of I don't really like the word energy because we don't know what we're talking about, but it's a not inappropriate word of these waves of energies, palpable, physical. You feel them, right? And with them, my body just started moving, and now that was very interesting to me because my mind is going, wait a minute, I'm not.
You're not directing it.
This is just an energy that's moving me. And I was, at least open to and enough interested in, I guess, these kinds of worlds that I just went with it. And it opened something in me. I really, truly became, I don't even want to call it a dancer, but definitely, it's a quality of letting go, getting high, and then you let go. And if you really let go, the body naturally wants to start making movements.
Right.
And maybe they're very soft and subtle, like a spontaneous kind of Tai Chi, or maybe they're almost like a ballet dancer and strong and vital, or kind of different totally different kinds of things. But again, it just occurs. It's not like, okay, I think I'm going to do the triple Lindy now. It's not like.
Well, what was clear to me, it seemed, was that both. So what we were talking about before, that Buddhist thing of trying to be still and focus on the breath, and that it's still with the goal to get you out of your head. And it's to kind of go about it in different ways, and that you can go about that same idea in movement, in being in your body and moving. And I think to some people, to me, I think definitely that seems like more natural for me, or it would be more.
Oh, you just froze.
Oh no, I can still see you.
I don't know if you can hear me. You just froze.
Oh, okay. Well, it should come back. I think it'll come back.
You're in the middle of a really good thought too.
Yeah, I can see you perfectly. So that's funny. Can you see me yet? So what I think I was talking about beforehand was that it seemed like through both of these different techniques, we're talking about one being like
Right.
smoking marijuana and being in the body and creating movement and moving around to get out of your head and into your body. The other
Right.
being sitting very still and focusing on your breathing specifically. You can get to a similar place, which is out of your mind and into your body. And one thing that it seems to me is that maybe by sitting very still and focusing only on your breath, you're at least removing excess stimulation that could maybe trigger extra thoughts or something. So maybe as
Yeah.
a beginner practice, that could be very good. But the movement being something you can move into for maybe
Yeah.
greater effect or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And, a couple of things to say. Um, I don't necessarily think it is the same with the Shiva practices. They definitely work through the awakening of the feeling presence on every cell of the body, right? The practices of just focusing on the breath don't necessarily awaken the body. It'll give you a much calmer settling into the body. What they are very, very effective at doing over a number of days is calming out the yada 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 yada
Oh
yada.
yeah.
So it goes, and so you can get into this very very pure present place. Now, what's interesting, Carl, again, from my perspective, and this is where we start as Dharma practitioners. A lot of the Buddhist Dharma, that's where they start, and that's it. That's where they stay. The Buddha, even the Buddha, it wasn't just to observe the breath. The next instruction was now start getting more subtly aware of it, get more sophisticated in being able to differentiate between the nuances, the coloring. So you're starting to feel more. And then the instructions culminate in an altogether remarkable statement where he says that that the culmination of breathing awareness is that as you breathe in, doesn't say you're just going to be aware of an isolated part of the body. He says as you breathe in through the whole body. As you breathe out through the whole body. Now, that's more the level of Buddhist practice that I teach. In the retreats that I teach and with the students that I work with, we don't necessarily spend a whole lot of time on what's traditionally called the shamatha, or the anapana practices of just focusing down, and you get the mind very, very calmed down. Oh, look, it's an extraordinary practice, right? But I don't want people just to stay there. And even in the Dharma retreats, well, especially in the Dharma retreats, I want them to move into exploring this notion of what does breathing through the whole body, what could that possibly mean? Every 10th grade kid who's done a biology course now knows that no, you don't breathe through the whole body. It goes in the mouth, through the lungs.
Yeah.
But that is still a relatively recently acquired knowledge, only in the 18th century. And, for all of, our human history anyway, people didn't understand how, our scientific understanding of the breath. So for the Buddha to say something like that, it's very clear that he's reflecting some kind of experiential reality, maybe not a specifically anatomical one. And a lot of what starts happening, you can, there is this focusing, refocusing, focusing, losing, refocusing. That's, the basic Buddhist practice. But when you get into a more Shiva orientation to Buddhist practice, and we haven't even gotten into, using marijuana. Remember, in the Dharma retreats that I teach, we teach according to all the precepts. We just stay working with a non-medicated mind. But what I then start getting the people into is starting to not only awaken the body, but start opening, surrendering to the breath. And, two things. If you're going to breathe through the whole body, somehow, first of all, you have to awaken it. So you feel the whole thing as a unified field of presence. It's another thing that marijuana does, the cannabis works. But let's leave that aside for a moment. So, just by taking your awareness through your body, as is done in a very potent form of Burmese Buddhist practice, you can start awakening the sensations in the body. Now, if you hold the body very still, you're stifling sensations. So if you can start surrendering to the breath and realizing that in addition to awakening the feeling presence of the body, if you're going to want to breathe through the whole body, there has to be motion through the whole body in resilient response to the force of the breath, so that breath starts moving through the whole body, not in like how a wave moves through a body of water, no resistance. So you can't hold yourself ramrod still.
Right.
If I have again, a criticism, and criticism in the most positive sense, because, we see this and we can change it now, but the Dharma that's coming over from Asia, it's as though it's painted itself into this corner of frozen stillness, just frozen stillness. And that's, in the Buddhist context, what I'm trying to help all these people who are drawn to the different lineages and traditions of Buddhist Dharma to start letting go of. So in the Buddhist retreats that I teach, it's all about playing with sitting. Let's find, first of all, an upright that allows us to relax and let go. And then realizing that if we want to stay relaxed and let go, we have to just keep allowing these completely natural, you're not doing them, completely natural motions to come through, so that the breath does move through the whole body. And that takes people remarkably deep, remarkably rapidly. Now, I'm doing all of that within the context of traditional Dharma practice that has as its fifth precepts the use of no intoxicants. Now, some people have said, "Will, you're a Buddhist teacher. How could you possibly write this book?" It would have been cowardly of me not to write the book. It really would have been, because
of your own personal use and experience with it.
Of course, and my experience, and I've actually, at every retreat I've taught, 30, 40 people, however many people, there has been at least one person who at one point will come and they'll tug on my sleeve, and it's kind of, "Mr. Johnson, could I please speak with you privately?" And they share that cannabis is a substance that works for them, that helps them, but they are subject to so much shame and blame and contempt in the Dharma community that that has a very, very dim view on the use of cannabis. And partly I can understand that, because a cannabis use, we can go more asleep rather than more awakened. It depends on what we're we're doing.
Yeah. It's not all positive.
It's all over the spectrum. No, and unfortunately the prohibition has stopped much of this kind of conversation that we're having right now. This is a substance that you want to use in your life to awaken, to open.
Right. So maybe I can, right there, just cannabis aside, just going back into when you're working with people who are coming to do this type of practice, whether it's strictly Buddhist or the more Shiva-oriented approach, what is the goal for people? Just to clarify, what are people trying to get out of this type of practice?
Well, I think they're trying to feel better. I think they're trying to come out of some of the pain and suffering in the body and the mind that are so epidemic.
Right.
Let's be honest. Or if people aren't feeling that, they're covered over in a layer of numbness. My observation, the word that I coined about the cultural condition that we're all living in right now, it is a somatophobic culture.
I saw that word in the book. I wrote that word down because I was going to ask you about it.
Yeah. And, the soma is this awakened lived experience of the body. And we're talking about palpable sensations. You feel it. It's not just a concept or a nice platitude. You get this vibratory flows, like ebbing, flowing, the current of the life force. You feel it palpably moving through the body. Now, we live in a culture that is both afraid of that, doesn't want it, really, is holding back on it so tightly,
Right. So people being in their heads, being rationalizing everything, being just stuck
rationalizing
there.
belief about what religion should be, belief about what
Hmm.
I should be, believe, and it's so
Hmm.
bound up in the small container of the egoic mind,
Right.
and frankly is afraid of the opening. A lot of the I mean, how how can it be that this simple plant on God's planet can cause so much insanity for some people?
Hmm.
No, bad. You shouldn't do that. It's
Yeah.
no. I mean, it's craziness. There's
Hmm.
an interesting book. I'll just take a slight detour into LSD, which is obviously a much stronger,
Yeah, sure.
But there's a wonderful book called Zigzag Zen.
Oh, I've
It's
heard of it. Yeah.
it's really good. It's interviews with Buddhist teachers about LSD and its relationship
Hmm.
to the Dharma. And most of I mean, there are some in the beginning. There's a couple of people saying, "Okay, here's your Buddhist practice we're doing. We're dropping and sitting on our cushions for
Hmm.
8 or 9 hours. All power to them. If that's where you want to go, right?
If it works, and yeah.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I'm open to whatever works. If cannabis works for people, great. If it doesn't work for you, great. But you have to take responsibility for making that decision. Anyway,
Yeah.
a lot of the American Buddhist teachers said, yeah, of course we did that. We went through cannabis and LSD and peyote, and those were the things from the 60s and
Right.
70s. But we don't do it anymore,
Hmm.
right? Some of the Asian teachers who've never taken LSD. The American teachers, yes, it was so valuable, but no, we don't do it anymore.
Right.
But the Asian teachers, without exception, have never, used that and saying, "Oh, bad, very bad, awful."
Right.
And I just call this attitude to task. And so I talked to the people in retreat that come to see me privately about that, and I said, "Look, if you're doing traditional Buddhist practices, these are the advantages of purifying the mind. Hey, listen, even Shiva practitioners, I want them to go to some of these Buddhist retreats and do both. It's about the balance, right?"
Right.
And I said, but if if it's an herb that works for you, here are some of the practices that you can do that you can fit in to
Yeah.
your to your dharma. And I tell them that the current spiritual world's attitude towards cannabis, it just reminds me of the 1950s straight world's attitudes towards gays. Shaming them, blaming,
Yeah.
hostility,
Right.
ostracism. Even though it's a natural phenomenon that closed mindset, the somatophobic mindset that is in the mind, it doesn't want to open these energies, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to let go to them, and they take us places. We're not the one necessarily driving the car anymore.
Right. Well, speaking about that and talking about this idea of whoever it is being either phobic or just shaming people for using some of these things. Let's talk about marijuana specifically here, because in Canada, on October 17th, it's supposed to be legalized nationwide, federally legal.
How did we leave Canada? We've been there for 40 years. Now we've left.
Right. So it's exciting for people like me. I talk about how beneficial these things can be, how ridiculous it is for them to be illegal, whether you're using them in yoga-like practices or whether you're just using them and playing video games on your off time.
Or relaxing. Everybody is going to take responsibility for themselves and do with it what they do with it. Some people have done work very well for. Okay.
Yeah.
Just acknowledge that. But for those of us that it works well for, and it's the vast majority, let's be honest here.
It's really just not that big of a deal. It becomes such a big controversial thing, and I think one of the things that's going to be helpful going forward for people is that having it legal in the culture will change some of these stigmas around it and some of the shame people feel for using it.
I hope you're right about that.
Might not be right away.
Yeah. I'm a little more cynical about that, because I do think what's happening in Canada is extraordinary, and it's like the tipping of the domino. And I think the line of dominoes. I think within 5 years, all sorts of other countries are going to legalize. But this is where I get cynical.
Yeah.
I think they're going to legalize not because they realize, well, yeah, I guess it is now part of the cultural gestalt, so we don't have to shame
the money.
blame. Exactly, and people, hallelujah, if that's what happens. It's interesting because those of us that use cannabis, well, for me anyway, most of us couldn't care less if anybody uses it or not. People who don't use cannabis sometimes have very strong feelings that nobody should be using it.
Right. It's a little bit silly. It just becomes a bit silly. Even for me, like I'm an advocate of more than marijuana. I'm speaking about the use of psilocybin mushrooms and these powerful psychedelics that can help people. Marijuana at this point for me is it's just like a silly little afterthought. Like, of course it should be legal for people to use. It's not that big a deal. You can smoke it and be sober in a few hours. It's not that big of a deal. And for me too, it's not like I do use marijuana, but not that often these days. I do find detrimental effects of smoking marijuana too, things that I don't like, that it seems to affect me and do to me. But I do like it for some things, and often it is physical things. I like I smoke marijuana sometimes and play soccer. It's a fun thing to do, and
physical to go into your body.
Yeah, it works very well for that.
Known as skateboarder who doesn't
right, or surfer. Yeah. I'm from Tofino, and there's a lot of surfers who like to do that.
For sure. Yeah. And again, remember, this goes back to Shiva, who the legends with Shiva, he and his wife Parvati. I have an old Indian miniature showing them preparing bhang, a drink, a cannabis drink. And he would drink a cannabis, and the legends down to this day in India is that then he would stand up, his body would start making spontaneous movements. This is what happened to me. This is what happened to so many people. And for him, because he's this legendary initial being, I call Shiva the original pothead, right?
Right.
That out of that, his body's starting to move, and yoga asanas start happening. He brings yoga to the planet. The body starts moving, and spontaneous movement and dance comes to the planet. Now, many people that I share this story with resonate very, very, very deeply, especially your generation.
Right.
That a lot of you grew up on the rave movement. You guys got into your bodies. Good on to you. I'm jealous. It took me a long time to, machine my way through the somatophobic injunction not to move, let alone to feel.
Well, one question I would like to pose, maybe something we can break down a little bit, is looking at, say, Canada, because marijuana is going to be legal in the country. How do you think over time having marijuana legalized and available for use in communities and in our country as a whole will change the communities? I mean, it'll start with individuals, but also eventually these stigmas will break down, and then how it affects individuals will spread as well. And how do you see the marijuana changing the country as a whole in a few years?
Well, we can talk pie in the sky too. I'm a child of the '60s. I got the '60s, right? I got music. I got the mind expanding sacraments. I got the support to open, and the best of what that was very, very good indeed. And I really do. I want to believe that more people will, now that it's legal. I know a lot of people say, well, once it's legalized, then I'll try it, right? And these people, a majority, many of them are going to have similar experiences to what happened to you the first time you got high, or to me. And from my perspective, as long as we do not abuse the medicine, right? It can be extraordinarily beneficial. My wife and I were talking the other day. The one we're thinking of, think of government figures 50 years from now who they're not into drinking. They're not into what alcohol does to you and drinking alcohol to excess, as some people do. But they've been people who've grown up with just this kinder, gentler, more naturally connected, organic, nature-oriented feeling awareness.
Right. Yeah.
It certainly is hopeful. Let's hope that we're right about that.
Yeah. I guess you never really know. It's hard to
Honestly, I can't.
foresee.
And I think the important thing. I mean, it's interesting. Alcohol can make people nasty.
Mm-hmm.
You get typical bar scenes and bar fights. That doesn't happen with cannabis.
No, the cannabis.
They get calmer. They get, they want to do yoga, or they want to just sit here and be with my lover.
Right. There's definitely a spirit of like live and let live when it comes to marijuana. Like you're just kind of like, I don't care that much about what other people do. It actually doesn't bother me anymore. Maybe
That's right.
when you're stuck in your head and you're just in this judgmental way of thinking, you can be too focused on other people. I think marijuana, even at its worst, marijuana makes you hyper focused on yourself a little bit. And one of the downsides is you can have this paranoia where you're like,
Right.
everything I say, I feel like I'm being awkward and I don't know how to not do that. It can kind of put you in your own head in that sense a bit.
Yeah, and that kind of paranoia happens often in social situations. Social situations are terrible. It's a terrible environment to get high in unless everybody there is doing the same thing.
Right. And that's
So
something true of definitely of like psychedelics. Like say like when people
Right.
tell me
Yeah.
they go take mushrooms out in public, I'm like, well, of course you had a bad
No.
experience. I would never do that.
I
But
never do
marijuana,
that.
people do it with marijuana simply like because it's so much more mild, they feel like they can just get away with it kind of thing. And people who are kind of potheads get much more used to the experience and
Right.
are able to navigate it better. But it is kind of a weird idea.
Yeah, again, I used it, or I like to embrace it as a very, very sacred herb that's here for the purpose of opening us to a greater embodied experience and understanding of what it is to be human, to be incarnated in this human body on the planet, and open us to much, much bigger awarenesses than are available outside of using it, or maybe doing really intensive dharma practice.
Right.
I am someone, I don't mix them. Like I say, I don't. When I teach in the Buddhist world, I want to work with that calming of the mind. For me, it also is awakening the body.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't use cannabis in those contexts. On my own, with a lot of the body-oriented practices, that I do, I will. The spontaneous movement practices. One of my practices is I use very small amounts, and all of a sudden I start feeling it. I play with upright balance, and next thing I know, my body's moving, and I just go. I see where it takes me for anything that's physical. I like doing Pilates. I like we have. In our home here, we built a very narrow but long pool, so I can, work out in the pool. And
Right. For movements like that, it really is great, and that'll be something I think. What I think is going to happen when it's legalized in Canada is a lot of older people who've never tried it are going to feel like, okay, maybe I could try this, and they're going to find like their arthritis gets better and things like that.
Tomorrow. A student of mine from New York is flying down here, and I'm going to work with her very intensively for 5 days. She's a very, very committed, wonderful, wonderful being, Buddhist, person, and she just wants more help with, opening up her sitting practice. We're not going to be using cannabis.
Right. So yeah.
So,
it's not that you're like pushing it on people or anything like this.
No, and as I said in the book, I wanted to be clear. I'm not writing the book because I want to be some kind of pot guru or everybody go out and do this and do these practices, But I'm also, I can't deny, as I said, it would have been cowardly of me not to share what some of these wildly potent practices are. That you can do them without cannabis, but if you're doing cannabis, they're really extraordinary practices to explore the spontaneous movement. We haven't talked about the gazing practices. The Sufi gazing practices are beyond wonderful and wild.
Okay, do you want to just introduce people to what that is?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Uh, uh, I mean, it's a fun little bit of background. How old am I? 22, and I'm hitchhiking from Oakland to San Francisco to go to an Asian Studies graduate school. I lasted one semester. I saw it wasn't in academics.
Okay, yeah.
Look for it. A guy picked me up. It was just one of those chance things. He was an older guy, 20 years older. And it's just one of those things. Sometimes you meet someone, within 5 minutes, we're telling each other the story of our lives. We got to where he dropped me off. We talked for another couple hours, and we connect. And we reconnected about a year later at a Buddhist center that I had told him about. And then I started living in the house that he and his wife were selling because they were moving into the center. Phil was an art teacher who'd stop off after teaching, and we would get high and just start opening with each other. We could ask each other anything. We'd tell each other anything. It was a friendship that was just a really, really wonderful, guy friendship.
Yeah.
It wasn't sexual in any way. It was deep, deep guy friendship. It had been sexual. Nothing would have been wrong with that, but it just wasn't for, how he and I were wired. And one day we're at opposite ends of a sofa, and it's late in the day in the San Francisco fog and the fire. And he kind of turned to me and looked at me, and I looked at him, and we held each other's gaze. And about 10 seconds later, we both immediately looked away. And he said, "Whoa, hey, whoa, what was that?" And he said, and I said, I don't know. Something was going on. I said, "Yeah, why did we look away?" And I said, "I looked away because when I held your gaze like that, I started feeling too much." And he said, "Yeah, me too. What's wrong with that?" And to this day, I bow down on hands and knees to this great friend. We turned, and we were quite high. We turned and held each other's gaze. And what happened in the next hour, I feel that neither of us were ever the same. After that. So this is simply a practice. Now, this is irritates me. I actually wrote to Steve Jobs about this. But it was when he was really sick at the end. But I think he would have been interested in this. You can't use Skype or FaceTime or any of these things to do the gazing practice because the camera is not right where I'm looking. It's up above. So what you're seeing right now is me not looking right at you in your eyes, but looking down.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's a little, and it's a step removed as well. It's a little different.
Oh, I was convinced that it could be outrageously powerful, even from a
if the camera was right in the center of the screen or something.
If I look at the camera like right now, it looks like I'm looking right at you, right in your eyes, right?
But it's true.
So, because if two people sit on a sofa and there's a mirror, they can both look at each other's reflection in the mirror, and the same thing happens if you're face to face with each other. You go through it. It's wild, and it's wonderful.
So it's just the act of looking at someone directly in the eyes, with them looking right back at you, and just holding that.
Hold gaze and just letting go, and whatever wants to happen. The first thing that happens, you get strong physical sensations. It's deeply body oriented and is deeply great for awakening the body. The next thing that can start happening is the visual field can become very unusual. The hard edges of your partner's face can get soft, or there's light or color, or occasionally your partner's face can completely morph into something different, or they can disappear. And eventually you and your partner, the egoic separation between you, it's gone, and you're just swimming.
That's interesting.
In extraordinarily deep space. Now, Phil and I got into that in a big way. And then I came to understand that this was a practice. Are you familiar with the Sufi poet from the 13th century? His name is Rumi. A lot of people, Rumi poems. Okay, well, Rumi had an experience with a wandering seeker. They came together, they met, something happened. A later chronicler said that Rumi said when his gaze met the gaze of Shams of Tabriz, he felt his mind beginning to melt. The two of them went off together into retreat for 3 months, and they came out in a completely enlightened, transformed state. And if you read Rumi's poetry, and there's a lot of it, the most common things that he talks about is sitting face to face with another person, holding the gaze. So I got into that in a big way, and did quite a bit of teaching of that practice. Not me being the great gazer, and this person, that person. There are some gazing gurus that are traveling the planet, and that's what they're doing. I would get people, because it's just humans, a friend with a friend. You just sit, and you can have these wild experiences. Now, you don't need cannabis to experience the potency of that. If you use cannabis,
people, I think if you step back and just look at, like, eye contact is a pretty powerful thing. People are pretty aware of that. If you look someone right in the eyes, we have a very weird capacity for seeing when people are looking at us too. Like, we can see someone in peripheral vision way off in the distance and know that they're looking at us, but then it's like a subtle movement of the eyes. It's
somehow right.
Yeah, it's an ingrained thing in us.
Yes, it's very powerful, and most of us will avoid eye contact, because if we maintain eye contact, you are immediately, just like entering into a whirlpool, you're going to be drawn down into the vortex of this shift in consciousness.
And it kind of opens us up. You feel vulnerable, kind of. If you look someone right in the eye, you feel like they can see into you somehow.
Totally. And also what happens, you hold someone's gaze, and the next thing you know, something's starting to come up. It's like layers start releasing and liberating, and some of them are beatific. And then suddenly I'm in touch with, I feel like a terrified little boy. I'm scared, but I'm still. But what do most of us do at that point? Oh yeah, we look away.
Yeah.
I ain't going there.
Yeah.
But if you just stay with your friends, stay in that space, and it comes and it comes and it comes, and the next thing you know, it lifts, and you feel like a wise elder, and it goes in and out, and you see things in your partner. It is an extraordinary practice that I would just love to see more and more people embrace. The gazers of this world who, I'm in the Buddhist world, but I'm also in the Sufi world, and I've done a number of books about the gazing practice. And I also talk about the gazing practice in the current book, right? This book, I talk about it. If you're going to use cannabis, play here and see what's going to
I could see that being a powerful thing, an interesting technique to actually develop. I mean, you'd want to do it with someone you trust and can be kind of vulnerable with, but yeah, actually, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine who's similar to that friend you described, someone I can talk about anything with. We have good dialogue and good back and forth. We were drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana not that long ago, one night, and then I forget how it happened. We're kind of making fun of each other, I think, and talking about how things can be awkward. And I think one of us said, like, how awkward would it be now if neither of us said anything and we just looked at each other? And then we did that to just see what it would feel like. And we did it for like 10, 15 seconds or something, not that long. But it was funny how everything, it just quieted everything all of a sudden. And it just honed us right into each other.
You get into the body and you get into presence. And it's like you pull the plug on the yada, and I think I'm going to, and that, you pull the plug on that. So I encourage you, good on you, man. I mean, that's great.
It was just funny that it just happened.
But you go back and see your friend. Don't drink any alcohol. just use some very good quality. Probably a sativa. Bud, and let's go a little bit longer than 10 or 15 seconds. Hang out like that at opposite ends of the sofa for about an hour and see what happens.
Now, I imagine a lot of giggling early on.
Giggling. I would do this with people, and within 15 seconds or a minute, sometimes there's tears or bawling, and other people are gut wrenching, laughing hysterically.
Mm.
You
Right.
get
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the giggles, and you can't stop. Whatever happens is the perfect thing to be happening. Don't think,
Right.
oh, I'm giggling, I shouldn't be giggling, or
Right.
oh
Right.
God, I'm feeling scared. I don't want you to see me like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It, it's about really becoming naked souls,
Yeah.
uh, presence of each other. It will forever alter your understanding of the meaning of friendship.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, and
yeah,
that's another. There's another practice I wanted to ask you about too. That reminds me.
sure.
In your book, you talk about another group of yogis. I want to say like Bhakta or something.
The bhakti yogis, the
The
bhakti
ones who
yogis.
use sound and
Yeah,
notes.
absolutely.
I wonder if you could tell
Yeah.
people a little bit about that practice and what those
Yeah,
fellas do.
yeah. Okay, another of the reasons that I'm cannabis friendly is that I've been a musician all my life,
Mm.
and I
Right.
was in
Yeah.
university. I played guitar. University, I'm playing classical guitar, and it's part of the whole intellectual thing. Beautiful music, I still love it.
Hmm.
I started getting high. I couldn't play classical music anymore because I couldn't force myself to do something. It was all about letting go and
Mm.
allowing. So I started getting into playing with open tunings on the guitar and hitting drone strings and letting
Mm.
different kinds of sounds just come. I then lived and studied for a couple of years with a North Indian veena player, very old Hindu stringed instrument that was actually kind of a sound chamber. Because you create these sounds, and he would talk to me. He would say, the bhakti yoga, there's so many different forms of yoga. We mostly know the hatha yoga. There's lots of different ones, yogas of service, yogas of devotion, different kinds of yogas.
Hmm.
We mostly know bhakti yoga is a yoga of music, and it's mostly practiced now at events where someone comes and they'll sing a phrase and everybody in the audience joins in and singing, and it's very cool,
Mm.
right? However, in the early days, it was all about using sound to awaken the body, to awaken the energy centers and ultimately the consciousness
Mm.
of the body. So we were exploring very deeply the traditional North Indian scales, and he would have me as a way of learning these scales, some of which are familiar to Western music, some of which are very different, to sing the scales. Now I don't play that instrument anymore, but boy, it's sure those scales got into my bones. And a lot of the music that I do play on the electric guitar is in a tuning like a North Indian stringed instrument. I play it over a drone instrument, as well as other stuff that I do. Now his tradition was the Shiva tradition. He would to play his instrument. He would wake up in the morning. He was when he was living at this gets very exotic. He was living at a palace with a young Maharaja who wanted him to teach him how to play the veena. And they lived kind of a rock and roll lifestyle. They'd get up at 5 PM. He'd come over to the palace. They'd bring out food and drink and the
Yeah, that
instruments.
was
And
in
then,
the book. I remember that story.
yeah, they bring the hookah and they play music all night long. And for me as a musician, especially, I no, I will not play music without first invoking Shiva. It doesn't happen. I just won't
Just
do
goes
it. And
hand in hand, eh?
yeah, and there's a tradition of that, starting with the white jazz horn player, Ms. Mesro, up through Snoop Dogg and the Grateful Dead and Willie Nelson
Yeah.
and Louis Armstrong. And, let's be honest about that, right? So there's something about the herb, Shiva's herb, that enhances the potency of sound.
Mm.
And I really would love to see people get into this, because so many people have been told, oh, you can't sing, you've got a terrible voice.
Mm.
It's ridiculous. Had I known, I would have brought this with me. There's something called a tambura. It's the drone instrument that's played behind all of the Indian music, whether it's a stringed instrument, a singer, a flute player, whatever. And it just creates this. And so over that, you can get into playing with scales. Just learning some of those scales honestly, if I could do this, anybody can do this. So there's a whole section in the book. I really encourage people. You need something called an electronic tambura that gives you that drone, and then I talk very specifically about what the basic parent scales are, and I encourage people, if they have this kind of inclination, or they're looking for some kind of permission to let go and just let their voice go.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
an extraordinary way to do it. And this is another of the practices for which cannabis can be an extraordinary support and helper.
Yeah, and I know that just as a young person first getting into using marijuana, one of the first things you notice is listening to music, maybe sitting in a car just listening to music, and it would just sound so incredible, like whatever it was, the Beatles or something, and it would just be amazing. Yeah, it really would enhance it in a way.
Yeah, exactly. So, sound and the herb. Well, it's interesting. I wouldn't imagine that a whole lot of the players in the New York Philharmonic Orchestra get high before they come out and perform Beethoven, because it's different. And
it's more structured than just
Oh, it's totally structured, right?
Yeah.
And, with my music teacher, he'd say, "Look, you've got the scale, you've got the drone. That's your bass. You know the notes of the scale. Just let go. Just let go. Just go here. Just see where it'll start playing itself." And that has been
once you learn the skills. Yeah, that's something that actually reminds me of what I find marijuana good for is once you I wouldn't use marijuana if I was going to be learning something brand new and I had to learn a whole bunch of techniques that I had to get my body to remember and learn those physical movements. But once you have those down,
it depends on what you're learning. But I get what you're saying. Like my wife and I are learning how to speak Spanish down here in Costa Rica. No, we're like
marijuana is not great for something like that, especially when you have to short-term memory, remember lots of little things and keep them in your head for a long time. I find it not as useful.
Yeah,
but to just play, once you have a skill set, then you want to just go play, and your body knows those movements already. You can just go be in flow state, kind of thing.
Exactly. So you want to learn your scales, so then you can let go.
Yeah.
And let the music. I mean, to me, the greatest musicians are like the Jerry Garcias and the Miles Davises and the Coltranes and the the guys that could just let go. Jerry Garcia used to say, because he would just practice scales and practice scales and practice scales. People say, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "Well, I want to have something to fall back on those nights that, for whatever reason, God doesn't come and sit on my shoulder."
Right.
It's like that. So you want to have your foundation, but then it's about
you just play.
It's about the magic of letting go. And for me, the experience, the sense of self that comes through, the experiential sense of self that comes through this letting go, and you're feeling this current moving you here and now here, and just allowing it and going with that. I just like it there much, much more. Tight, there's so much pain and holding that most people don't even let themselves feel. They cover it over with this numbness. People who are lost in their minds, a somatophobic holding pattern, you blocked out the buzz, the aliveness, the vibratory presence.
Yeah.
And for me, it's activating that, and that takes me into it opens me into working on myself in such a way, letting go of some of the resistances that come up to that, but that I feel are all leading me to that great wide open dimension that I personally feel is our birthright. And I teach that through the Buddhist practices, but it's also available through some of these practices that I'm talking about in the book. I never talk to Buddhist students and say, "Come on, man, you got to start getting high now." No, I mean that. I don't go there. And but if people are if cannabis is an ally in their life, and they're Dharma practitioners, yes, do your Dharma practices, but also, explore some of this other stuff
Right.
too. That's really just the bottom line.
Yeah, that seems like the main message, hey?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I have a thing I often say. I don't care as a teacher because I get students. Oh, Mr. Johnson. As soon as they call me Mr. Johnson, I'm a little kind of okay. Let's see what this is all about.
Yeah.
Or hey, Will, what? How should I do this? What should I be doing? And I tell them, look, I don't care what you're doing. I care about how you're doing what you're doing when you're doing it. So, if you're sitting on your cushion and really going through a lot of purification, probably no coffee, certainly no alcohol, no marijuana, no mood alterators, maybe eating, very lightly. Yeah, do that. Get into it. If you're going to use cannabis, okay, use it as a tool to keep expanding, opening, and letting go. Don't use it as a tool to shut down.
Right. Yeah.
So
there's best practices.
Yeah, that's interesting. You could say that. It's like best practices of if you're going to use this. And I don't want to get too out there on this wild spiritual edge of the spectrum. It's extraordinarily potent for that, but it's potent for creativity, for playing music, for just being a more loving person, for definitely exploring the energies of touch with with a sexual partner, and or you can combine some of those. Certainly with my my wife, for us, sexual embrace can be combined with gazing practices, and that's something that you need to experience to really believe what's going on.
Yeah, marijuana definitely can be used in that way for sure. I do find sometimes, like I know when it just hit I don't know if it's the right dose or just the right timing or whatever, but when you use it and you are in that state and you're intimate with someone, it's amazing. It can be really great. But also sometimes I find it can just make me giggly and not really into it, and kind of just like I don't know. It doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so it's right dose, it's right setting. It's also the right person. That has a lot to do with it too, right?
Yeah, and your states and everything.
And it's with the gazing practice. You can do that practice with anybody. Having said that, some people you're going to go deeper with than others. And it may just happen that you sit down with someone and who knows why, but the two of you go into a deep place like you just haven't gone to in the gazing practice. The same is true, let's be honest, about sexual attraction.
Right.
That there's so many different layers and levels of that quality of attraction, and when you're around the corner and that person is there,
right, and
it's just oh shit, I don't know what happened, but
right, you can't always break it down as to why it is, but
and that's how the greatest couplings and relationships occur, and you have that extraordinary deep whatever it is. And that naturally you enter into, the dance. It just happens,
Yeah.
There is the dance, and it occurs. And then if, cannabis, if you're both similar kinds of users, and it can, support that, and then add gazing to that play, and it's can be very extraordinary.
I'll try it out. I'll see who's willing to try gazing with me, and maybe give that a go.
Yeah. I mean, good friend gazing. Don't think of what we've been talking about for the last minute. Oh, then I got to take it into sexual embrace. No, that's 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 personal. Everybody has to make their peace with how that works for them.
But I could see that happening in that state. But anyway, how can people get in touch with you, Will? And maybe if they want to come see you in Costa Rica, do you have a name for the retreats that you offer there?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the website is www.embodiment.net, and embodiment is spelled EMBODIMENT.net.
Oh yeah.
So it lists the whole range of the practices there. It lists, I've done a lot of writing all my life, so it lists a lot of the books. This last book is Now, I think I alluded to cannabis in an earlier book called Yoga the Mahamudra. But this is the first book that, openly I've said this is what it's going to be like. And actually, what this book is, the first third of it, I'm talking about traditional Buddhist practices and why that constant focusing, losing the focus and refocusing, that doesn't work very well for me with, cannabis. So why for the Buddhist practices, no, it doesn't really work that well. But for these more surrendered, letting go, awaken Shiva practices, yeah, those are the practices that it works for. But on my website, there's ways of getting in touch. Actually, at this point, my wife and I, we're just setting ourselves up here. We're not going to probably be doing many more. We're not going to be doing any traveling and teaching up to North America probably for the next year. But then we'll start again, in probably getting invitations from, Buddhist centers. So, so long as some of the
you might be doing trips in the future up to.
Really pissed off at me for writing this book. It is interesting, with the right invitation and the right setting and the right people, I might be open to teaching something in Colorado or Canada or Washington.
Yeah. That would probably be really good timing, actually, after it's legalized, and to have people actually teach some good practices on how to use cannabis well.
Yeah, I certainly could do that. That's, to my knowledge, that's never been done. Well, I guess I just plant the seed right there.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Look, don't get me wrong. I love the Buddhist practices. I love those practices. And I love the purification that goes on with those practices. But I also love the Shiva practices. And remember, I talk about playing with this dance of balance. It's and it's not like a place of balance,
right?
Because it's always moving.
It's movement. It's constantly changing. Yeah.
There's no place like that. And I'm such a fanatic for balance that I like doing both. I like doing the very purificatory Buddhist practices and the extraordinarily celebratory Shiva practices.
Yeah.
That's just my particular.
I think that's a good place to be, and that's often my philosophy on lots of parts of life is the balance between it all,
Yeah, gotcha.
All right, well, Will, thanks a lot for talking to me. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, you're welcome. It was fun talking to you about this.